Hi there, and welcome to week 2 of How to Start a Board Game Company from Off the Page Games. I'm Jay Cormier, and this week we're going to be digging deep into contracts. Now, I've started this company based off of a game that I designed with a co-designer, Senfeng Lim, and you might have started a company based off a game that you designed, and therefore this specific week won't be as important to you. But if you're ever going to be signing somebody else's game, then this week is going to be very important for you. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to kind of go through line by line through a contract that actually Sen and I kind of tag team went back and forth to try to make sure it was fair for both sides, for the publisher and for the designer. So let's go to that now. Here we have the sample contract, so I've obviously put yellow wherever there is anything that you would enter yourself and customize. Obviously this is for me, between this contract is, this agreement is made as of this date, between me and my city and whatnot, known as the publisher. So you're defining things. The thing about contract is a lot of definitions. Once you say publisher, you can use that word for the rest of the contract. And the designer's name, where they're from and their province or state, and they're going to be known as the designers. This is might be just designer if it's just going to be one, but oftentimes you'll find that it's a lot of co-designers designing games nowadays, which is great. Designers are the originators of the design, concept, rules, mechanics, and methods of play for the game known as whatever it's called, and which will be further known as game. Okay, cool. So this is saying that, hey, you're the originator, you didn't steal it, I guess. Designer and publisher together called the parties, so that's cool. Wish the publisher to publish the game. Sure, great. Therefore, in consideration of the mutual covenants herein contained, and for other good and valuable consideration, the receipt and sufficiency of which each of the parties hereto hereby acknowledge, the parties hereto hereby... Wow, this is a mouthful, right? So this is obviously a lot of legal things saying, here's some definitions. So we're going to define designers mean that so-and-so and so-and-so are the designers of the game. Develop means the process of refining the game design prior to manufacturing. Includes playtesting, design, blah, 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 because we'll be talking about development later on. Manufacture means fabricating the game to the specification obtained from development. Kickstarter means Kickstarter.com. Out of print means having less than 100 analog copies of the game at the publisher, distributor, or fulfillment center's warehouse. That's interesting. Okay, that's good to kind of define. And wholesale price, because that's referenced later on. So this means the price offered to vendors and distributors, typically 40% of the listed MSRP for each game, modifications or expansion, minus the amount of any discounts, returns, allowances, and markdowns applied to the sale of the game modification expansion. So that's kind of cool. So that you'll see as we get to the royalties, it's going to be based on wholesale price. You can base it on other things as we'll talk about, but I think this is the fairest for both parties. So what are the rights granted to the publisher? The designers hereby grant to the publisher exclusive worldwide rights. So sometimes you might not do this. Nowadays, I think everybody just asks for worldwide rights just because why not, right? And everyone signs that away pretty much right away. When I first started out, it was just like U.S. rights, and then you could go to another publisher in a different country and get the rights for that country or that area. But now everybody pretty much wants worldwide rights. To develop, produce, manufacture, and sell the game in analog format. Cool. We'll talk about digital. It's coming up, don't worry. Develop, produce, manufacture, and sell merchandise associated with the game. That's pretty important. So you can sell t-shirts or stickers or posters or what have you. License the game to publishers outside of Canada for the production and sale of language localized editions of the game in analog format. Okay, good. And there's section 10 on royalties about discussing how that's distributed, how the money is figured out for everybody for that. Also, the designers grant to the publisher license accessories and merchandise associated with the game. That's kind of interesting. That kind of seems similar to B, doesn't it? License accessories. Well, I guess merchandise associated with the game, accessories, merchandise. I kind of adopted this from other contracts that I had, so maybe that's a duplicate, but it doesn't hurt. Develop, produce, manufacture, and sell the game in electronic format for web, computer, tablet, or mobile devices, or to license third-party companies or developers to perform these tasks. So that's in there. You got to make sure it's referenced to some sort of digital aspect of the game. And to market and sell the game, and or to contract with a fulfillment center or distributor of the publisher's choosing to market and sell the game. So now I as a publisher can go to any fulfillment center or distributor and say, hey, please sell this game. So that's what the designers are granting the rights to the publisher. The development. The publisher shall bear the cost to develop the game. So that's good that that's specified from a designer's perspective, that the designer may or may not be expected to help develop that. That's coming up. Now the designers, this is some new stuff that Sen and I added to our contracts, and this is going to be in all my contracts going forward. The designers shall have first right of refusal to design any derivative works related to the game. This is actually in most contracts, so this is fine. Included but not limited to expansions, modules, content-based stretch goals, that's a new thing, etc. If the designer is not able to or does not want to design additional content within 30 days of the request, the publisher can develop additional content themselves. This is something that I haven't seen in a contract before, and I think it's fair and protects the designer. So the designer has for 30 days to respond to that request of like, okay, can I fit this into my schedule? Can I do this? And obviously, that doesn't mean you have to wait the full 30 days. If you're, gung-ho, you can just go right away and you're like, yeah, let's do it. In such case, the publisher must review all additional content with the design. Oh, it says co-designer here, but it'll be, let me just change that. With the design, it should say designers. I had co-designer because I had a special contract made up just for Sen because he was the co-designer of this game that I'm publishing. The publisher has this is key. The publisher has the final decision on its inclusion in the game. So I've never seen this in a contract before, so I'm adding it in mine. Publisher, I must review all additional content. So that's in the contract, that any additional content in the game has to be reviewed with the designer. Now, it doesn't mean that the designer can veto it or anything like that. The publisher has the final decision on the inclusion of the game. The publisher is taking the risks on publishing the game. So hopefully with the partnership of working with the designer, you can come to a mutual agreement, obviously. If the designer points something out, how that breaks the game or how it's not going to work, I or any publisher who has this in there would hopefully listen to the designer, but it still is the publisher's right to include it or not include it in the game. The publisher will ensure the game offers a fair representation of genders and people of color within the constraints of the intellectual property. So this again is a new thing that I've added, I've never seen in a contract, trying to make sure as a publisher I'm being as fair as possible in representation of the communities that we're part of, and as much as possible, but I had to add within the constraints of the IP. So all of my games I'm publishing will be based on an IP, and so I have to use the characters that are in that intellectual property, in that license. But as much as possible, fair representation. Now, this is not much something that would really hold up tons in court. Like, I don't know how much somebody could say, hey, you didn't offer fair representation. I don't know. Maybe it could or not. I think it's just a goodwill kind of thing. Not sure how legal this is. Maybe I should have specified and started this whole video op by saying, hey, I'm not a lawyer, and a lot of this I've pieced together from other contracts, and then some of this I wrote myself, so it might not be worded in the best legally binding kind of way. So let me know if anybody that's a bit more legally minded has some better ideas on how to word some of these things. Okay, let's talk about the designers. The designers will both have their names. This is assuming there's two, so I don't know. I guess this from Sen and I, it always has been two, so that's why I kept it as this. Will both have their names on the box cover, obviously important, as well as in the rulebook. The designers' names will appear in alphabetical order by last name. Kind of cool to get that out of the way up front. So it's kind of fair. The designers' names will appear in the box and in the rules in this way, and then you put their names there so that there's no confusion, because my legal name is Jason Cormier, but I go by J. Cormier, so I would want J. Cormier to be what's on the box and rules, for example. The publisher will provide space in the rulebook for the designers to thank their play testers. So again, I've never seen this in a contract, and pretty much everybody allows this, but again, why not just have it in there so it's protected? I even added this. The amount of space will be decided by the publisher, but will be at least 7-point font, so that you're not going to get it at super tiny, like, thank you for all the people that helped me play this, like super tiny. It'll be at least a readable font. Each designer shall receive 6 copies of the game and 6 copies of every stretch goal from the total initial analog production run, and may utilize these copies as desired. So that's kind of fair. 6 copies each, so that's 12 copies total that I'm sending out. And calling out the stretch goals, I think is key. I haven't seen that in a lot of contracts, that they actually call out, and you'll get the stretch goal stuff as well. Now here's something else I haven't seen, and I added in my contracts. If there is a higher priced version, usually called a deluxe version, that's probably not very legally worded, then 3 of the 6 copies received by the designers will be the higher priced version. But no royalties paid on any of these copies. So this is key to point out. It happened to me recently. I was kind of thinking of a game that I had out in the Hall of the Mountain King on Kickstarter, and they had a deluxe and a not deluxe, and it made me wonder. I'm like, well, I wonder which version I'm going to be getting, the basic version or the deluxe version, as part of my free copies, and it's not in the contract. So I'm sure they're going to be great and nice and provide some deluxe, but this at least calls it out. This is the whole point of a contract. It's just to everyone's on the same page, everyone understands and has the same expectations like going in. So there's no like confusion or hurt feelings or anything like that. Going down to D, the designer has the right to purchase copies of the game at wholesale price as set by the publisher, but not to be used for resale. So it's not so you can start your own thing, but oftentimes they want to give some away, whatnot, as demo copies to their local stores or just to friends or whatnot, and they're playtesters, so that's fine. Sometimes you can put a limit on that. I've seen that, and I might add that in a future one. No more than X copies a year or something like that. The publisher and designers will each receive one analog copy of the game produced by any sub-licensor. So if somebody else wants to make the game in a different language, each of the designers will get a copy of that. And I think that's cool. I've always wanted that. And I have a copy of, for example, like Belfort in Portugal and Germany, different box covers, and that's just super cool and neat to see, and so I put that in there. And designers will be informed of every rule-based change to the game prior to any announcements of said change to the public. This is a new thing that I've added to my contracts. It's again, the publisher has the right to kind of change and develop the rules, but before it's announced to the public in any way, the designer will be informed of the rule-based change and probably asked and involved in making sure that that's a good rule change and whatnot. Some of these rules, some of these lines in the contract have come about because of some poor plays by some publishers that we've dealt with, and so we want to just call this out. So that's happened to us before, where rule change is kind of like, this is how the game is played, and we read the rules for the first time as anyone else is reading it, and we're like, what? That's not how we designed the game. And so that felt really yucky and awkward, so we just want to make sure it's called out and protecting the designer in that way. The timing, the publisher shall have full discretion to determine the timing of the game's publication. Cool, great, but there is some more timing coming up later on. Manufacturing. Publisher shall bear the cost of manufacture at least 1,000 analog copies. That's key to point out that you should have at least a minimum print run in that first, in your contract. Should have at least, for the first print run, it's going to be at least a certain amount, because what if they just do 10 and then that's it? And like all this time, obviously they're not going to do 10, but in a format consistent with industry standards, compliant with the laws, Canada. Publisher shall exercise its best efforts to publish the game in a format physically and financially attractive to customers and retail sales outlets, and physically and financially attractive to consumers and retail sales outlets. Yeah, I guess, I don't know why that has to be in a contract, but it's from another contract, so I kept it in there. But yeah, I guess it's kind of course you're going to make it look as good as possible. I wonder if somebody could, like, why would, as a publisher, would you want to publish something that looked garbagey? I don't know. Okay, publisher will set the price for the game using industry standard practices, but reserves the right to discount prices as necessary to secure sales, of course, and all monies will be in Canadian funds, if that's because I'm obviously in Canada. Now I have a section here on Kickstarter, so not all contracts have this, but I'd recommend that you add this to, if you're a designer, to your contracts, even as a publisher. Even if you're not sure as a designer if the game's going to go on Kickstarter, have this section in here, because if they don't go to Kickstarter, this is all, you'd ignore it because it's not on Kickstarter. The publisher shall use its experience and expertise to offer the game for sale on Kickstarter in a manner of its choosing. So this is because I am using it on Kickstarter, but if you're a designer and want to recommend this to publisher add this clause to your contract, maybe just reword it a bit if it goes on Kickstarter. The designers explicitly understands that an unsuccessfully funded Kickstarter campaign results in zero payment to the designers from the publisher. So that calls that out right clear, that you're getting no money if I get no money. Now, within 120 days of the successful completion of a Kickstarter campaign, the publisher will pay the designers X dollars for each copy of the game pledged for during the campaign, including any late pledges through a pledge manager. This is a couple things here, and I've seen something like this in contracts before, but I've changed mine to 120 days after the completion of the Kickstarter campaign. I think that's enough time for the publisher to have collected the monies, and for the pledge manager to have been completed. And this could be anywhere from $1 to $2 to $3, maybe, I don't know. That's obviously the rights I'm not going to go through right with you. That's something for you to negotiate and whatnot. But and it depends if you're going to be. This is for the designers, so that would be split between the designers, unless you wanted to say pay each designer X for each copy. You could do that if you have multiple designers. The publisher will provide all requests to designers for content-related aspects that will be used as stretch goals or promotional material prior to the launch of the Kickstarter. Any request for game-related content once the Kickstarter is begun can be considered out of scope of this contract. Now this is huge. Never seen it in a contract. I'm adding it to mine. What I'm trying to do here is saying, listen, there's going to be more requests for things like stretch goals. We all know that that's a thing that happens. But these are going to, once the Kickstarter starts, then any extra things I ask for during the campaign, which I still might and I still can, but those will be out of scope of this contract. It might be still in everybody's best interest for the designer to just do it, but it might get to a point where we have to negotiate another thing. Like, this is going to be a lot of work. If you want this extra, whole other mode to the game that requires so much testing, whatever, maybe that's a different contract we have to write up at that point. Or have that all figured out before you launch the Kickstarter. That's what I'm trying to put, why this is in here, is try to motivate the publisher, in this case me, to make sure everything's lined up prior to the launch of the Kickstarter. But we know that as we run a Kickstarter, if it explodes, then you're going to be asking the designers for lots of stuff. But that's fine. Then maybe that's out of scope and they have to design more stuff, and that should be compensated for justly. Here's the royalty section. The publisher will pay designers an advance of X dollars, Canadian, in my case it's Canadian, within 30 days of execution of this agreement. So that's good by both parties. Great. Said advance will be deducted from royalties to be paid out thereafter. For example, if a designer receives a $500 advance, $500 will be deducted from their first royalty check. This is super clear. You're going to get a certain dollar amount, but then that's going to be removed or taken away from your first royalty check. Or I wonder if I have to say from your something about from your royalty checks until it's paid off. Because you maybe only get $200 from your first royalty check. That would suck though, wouldn't it? After a Kickstarter, your first royalty check is not even $500. But that's interesting. Maybe I should change that. For all games sold other than on Kickstarter, whether direct or through distribution, cool, the publisher shall pay the designer royalty of X percentage of the wholesale price for each copy of the game sold. So we define wholesale price above, and that's usually 40% of the MSRP. And so then the designer gets a certain percentage of that. This is fair. I've seen some based, I would avoid using words like based on net income or based on profit. Those are very tricky words that smart and clever accounting can find their ways to giving you less and less money. Like if you said based on net income, which is the monies that they've received after they've paid off their things they have to pay off. So then what is an expense for that game versus for the company? And so if they go to Gen Con, has some of that expense go into that specific game, and therefore that eats into your royalties? So net income is pretty tricky, as is profits. So I'd be wary. I would just say don't sign anything with that on it. Ask them to change it, even if they have to change a percentage, because then the percentage might change and be lower, but that's fine. If it's based off of wholesale price or net revenue is another fine one. That's fine. Not even net, just revenue. But it's based on your revenue, because that's how much money do you make from this. I sold this to a distributor for X amount of dollars, then you get X percentage of that. So that's pretty cool. Okay, such royalties shall also apply to accessories and merchandise. Cool. And an interest, this I added this, an interest rate of 5% compounded monthly shall be applied to all late payments. This is, again, to protect the designer and to show that I'm serious. I'm going to pay you on time, because I have been part of a few publishers that I have to hound them for payments, and that's frustrating and annoying and doesn't create a good partnership. So this is kind of more showing you that I'm going to be paying you on time is the idea. Publisher shall pay the designer royalty of 12.5%. This I should probably put in yellow because this could change depending on, there we go. Usually it's like 25%, but it was because it was half. But anyways, this percentage could be whatever you want. Of the revenue of the publisher receives from any analog or digital sub-licenses of the game or related accessories or merchandise. So basically, if somebody else comes and says, hey, I want to license this game and print it in Spain or something like that, then I get kind of like a royalty from that. They pay me a certain amount. Of that amount, the designer here is going to get 12.5% of that amount. So I don't get tons from somebody wanting to print it in Spain, because I'm getting kind of like what a designer would get. I get a certain percentage because they obviously now need to make money over there. The publisher will send to the designer semi-annual statements. Now this is, I changed to semi-annual. Some people do quarterly. Some people do annual. I think annual is too infrequent. Of account no later than 60 days after the March 31st and September 30th, showing the number of units sold in each country, the net sales in each country, and the royalties owed. The royalty payments will accompany the above statements unless the designer's accumulated royalties in any single period are less than 200 Canadian. In that event, royalties will be held over to the next scheduled payment date, in which the accumulated royalties exceed $200. That's pretty cool. I think that's nice. Like, I don't want to start getting checks for $42, or I've literally had a check that was under $1 once. I'm like, don't send that. Why are you sending that check? That's not worth it. $200 is a fair amount. The publisher will keep detailed records of all its transactions regarding the game, and the designer shall be entitled to audit the publisher's books. This is pretty good. I've never had to do it, but I think it's important to have it in here. Giving reasonable notice beforehand. If the audit reveals errors to the designer's disadvantage, the publisher shall pay for any of the auditing expenses. Otherwise, the designer shall pay the expenses. That's cool. I've never seen it called out specifically like that before. I like that. And each party shall be responsible for its own individual taxes related to income derived from the sales of the game. Cool. Fair enough. Advertising and promotion of the game shall be wholly at the discretion of the publisher and their publisher's own expense, of course. The publisher shall receive a quantity of the game equal to 3% of the total production run. These copies shall be used for advertising, promotional, and what's key about this is no royalties will be paid on this. So just letting you know up front that if you're trying to do your own math on, oh, how much was your print run, so I should be making this, yeah, okay, what 3% of those might be held back for promotional purposes, giving for free to some stores as demo copies, this kind of thing. The designers can use images and materials from the game for their own promotion with the publisher's permission. We added this as a new thing because it's something we often want to do. The caveat here is with the publisher's permission anyway, so it doesn't say you can, but at least it shows that the door's open. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Copyright. Designers hold a copyright to the rules and methods of play aspect of the game. That's true of all kind of games that you submit. You still have the copyright to the rules and methods of play. When the game is published, the publisher holds a copyright to the name of the game, all physical and digital aspects of the art, and the components of the game. And each party is responsible for registering the respective copyrights with the appropriate agencies, which you do in Canada. You just create it, and it's already, you don't have to register it. Anyways, copyright condition will appear in the rules in the box. Cool. It'll have the C in a circle. Great. This is important. The term of this agreement is for 5 years from the effective date. So that's, you can make that obviously whatever you think it is, meaning this will exist for 5 years, and then it'll have to be renegotiated in 5 years if it's still selling well and whatnot. But it can be terminated. This is a very important part here. It may be terminated if the publisher determines that the designers have not achieved a publication-ready design by a specific date. I guess this also should be in yellow because you would change that. If the publisher for any reason fails to manufacture the game by a certain date, so that also should be in yellow. And if the Kickstarter campaign is unsuccessful, yeah, then this contract is terminated. For any reason the game remains out of print for greater than 24 consecutive months, that's a long time. I might change that to 12 months. That's pretty interesting. Publisher files for bankruptcy. 12 months is probably too short. Anyways, let's leave it at 24. And if I file for bankruptcy protection, cool. And the designer's reputation. The designers represent and warrant to the publisher as follows: that they are joint designers and owners of the game and the rights granted herein, and the game contains no material that plagiarizes, pirates, or infringes upon the copyrights, trademarks, or proprietary rights of any other product or person. And the game contains no material that is defamatory, libelous, slanderous, invasion of privacy, or otherwise unlawful. That's cool. That's good protection from for a publisher for sure. Now, publisher's failure to comply. Designers shall notify the publisher of the publisher's failure to comply with the term of this agreement by delivering a notice of such failure in writing, called the failure notice. Now, the publishers will have 30 days to respond. If the response is not satisfactory to the designers may refer the matter to arbitration for determination, or the parties may mutually agree to terminate the agreement. So it's like, hey, listen, you were supposed to do this according to the contract, and you didn't. What do you think we should do about it? And then the publisher has a chance to respond to that and try to come to an agreement, or it might go to arbitration, or it might go just say, hey, this is done. Why is there a comma there? There's no comma there. If termination in such a situation, the designers would retain the ownership of the rules, of course, method of play. Publisher retain ownership and rights to all physical, digital aspects and the art and the components. Produce copy of the game still in stock. Publisher will retain non-exclusive rights, sales rights to the game until the supply runs out, and publisher would be responsible for paying normal designer royalties, of course. Even if the contract is terminated, I still have to pay, of course. And then there's a bunch of these things which I can go into detail. These are way more boring, but these are just standard that are in every contract, so I'm not 100% sure about why they're all there, but they're part of every contract. Indemnification. Parties shall indemnify and hold each other harmless against any claim, demand, suit, action, proceeding, prosecution, or judgment based upon the individual actions of the other parties and the exercise of the rights conferred by this agreement, including all reasonable expenses, losses, penalty, legal fees, liabilities suffered or incurred. I'm not going to go into detail why these are in here. Nothing contained in this agreement or in any acts of the parties shall be deemed to create a partnership. We don't have a partnership. The laws is based on British Columbia and Canada. This agreement may not be amended, and this deemed if any provision of this agreement is deemed invalid, maybe because a law changed, it still means the rest of this agreement shall be in full effect. And this is an entirety. Anything after this or anything oral, written, all of the communications is not part of this agreement. And this assignment shall be binding upon and inure to the benefits of the party named herein. Parties may not otherwise assign the rights or obligations. So you're signing for yourself, and that's it. And then you could have a witness sign it, and you sign it, and the designer sign it, and that's it. And that is a contract. So there you have it. That's an in-depth look at a contract. Let me know below if you think there's some things that I missed, or some things you question or have more questions about. And maybe I'll even include a link to this as a PDF if you want a copy for yourself, because I feel that this is a contract that should be out for everybody to use, really, because I think it's a good contract. That's it for this week. Next week, we're either going to talk about game development, talking about what we're doing with the game at this stage right now. Like, the game is done and designed. Hopefully your game, if you're at this stage, is fully designed, ready to go, which mine is. But what are we talking about with regards to thinking about stretch goals and whatnot? Or the financial plan. So either super fun game design type development stuff, or we'll go into details about financial plan. That's coming eventually, either this week, next week, or the week after, where I have a financial person who's going to walk us through kind of like a spreadsheet of how to lay out and account for all the expectations of monies and whatnot that you need to do when you're running a business. So super fun, right? That's why we're here. Thanks so much for tuning in. Let me know your comments below. Feel free to subscribe if you're so inclined. And that's it for me. My name's Jay Cormier from Off the Page Games. Have a good one.